We've got Dr. Dominic Henry speaking today. He's an honorary research associate in the stats department here, GCC, and he first joined SEEC in 2016 as a postdoc, working on the Biogaps project in collaboration with Sandy. And currently he's working at EWT, and his interests lie in exploring processes and patterns of biodiversity. And today he'll be giving us the lowdown on our Markdown. Thank you, Dom.
Thanks, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to just provide some basics and introduction into R Markdown. So it's not extremely advanced or presenting any advanced methods in R Markdown, but hopefully, if you've never used it, this kind of provides a motivation to look more deeply into the power of R Markdown. So hopefully this just piques your interest a little bit more. But I have found it, I use it quite often, not in its most complex way, but often in the workflows and in stuff that I do. So I quite fancy it. So just some of the basics. What is Markdown? So Markdown is essentially just a simple plain text formatting syntax. And the purpose of the syntax was designed to write HTML valid code without having to put all the text modifying codes, text modifiers that you need to when you write HTML text. So I'll show you an example of that now. So the goal of this Markdown language was to have something that was easy, not only easy to read, but also very easy to write. That was one of the important motivations. So it's an alternative to things like a word processor or PowerPoint, where what you see and what you're writing is what you actually end up getting. So it's quite different to that. And what's important to know is there are also lots of different Markdown language variations. So over the course of its evolution, different sectors have kind of adopted different formats and slight variations on the theme. So and another important thing is that if you ever see a file with a .md extension, you know that is a Markdown document. So this is just to illustrate the motivation for creation of Markdown. So the text on the left here is what we call markup text, right? So we have bolded text, we have italics, we've got bulleted points, and that's normally what you would do yourself in Word. And Markdown is a language, the syntax to create that text on the left using this text in blue. So to create the bulleted points, we've got asterisks, and then to create italic text, we've got underscores. And if you've ever used it, you can even do this on WhatsApp. If you want to create bold or italic text, it uses the same kind of format, right? So it's very easy to read that and see how it converts into the marked up text. So the equivalent, if you had to write that in HTML, would look like this. So lots of these text modifiers, very difficult to remember and very messy to read. So this really was the primary motivation for how we get to marked up language without having to do HTML. So very simple but powerful. So that is Markdown, but what is R Markdown? So essentially that Markdown language was quite simple. It didn't have the ability to include tables or scientific notation or references or other complex kind of pieces of text that you would want in a kind of scientific document. So then in 2012, that motivation spawned the knit-R package, which essentially provided a R Markdown document format. And the main goal in that package was to create Markdown files that could handle R code, although it can handle different languages. But it was primarily developed to handle R code and insert code into the Markdown document, execute that code, and then present those results. So what it does is the knitting part is to execute and then knits the actual results back into the Markdown document. So it's an RMD file, and then it takes that, does the knitting, turns it into a Markdown file, and then we end up with that same Markdown language. Now, part of the development of how this all worked was this piece of software called Pandocs. So that essentially opened up the output possibilities. So traditionally, Markdown language was used to create HTML valid text. But with this Pandoc software, we're now able to render that Markdown document into PowerPoint, Word, or PDF formats. There are other options too. But the development of both of these, Pandoc and NIDAR, is what really drove the refining and improving some of the functionality for R Markdown. So that's R Markdown, the document format. So R Markdown, one word, package, is the package that we would use in R. And that essentially provides this comprehensive platform for authoring documents of all kinds. So its primary purpose is just to provide sensible defaults and a very user-friendly way to create Markdown documents. And it does a couple of other things, but it uses functions from the knit-R package and Pandoc to do the knitting and to do the conversion. So it's just a kind of one-stop place to do all of that. And it obviously integrates with RStudio perfectly, which is very useful. So some of the benefits of using the Markdown package, the R Markdown package, is to compile documents in a bunch of different formats. You can create notebooks, so a kind of similar thing to a Markdown document, but you can run these interactively in RStudio. You can build slide presentations in a bunch of formats. You can also, if you've ever looked at Shiny apps, you can build interactive apps with the package. And you can write journal articles and even books. There's a very similar package called Bookdown, in which people seriously do write books in this language. So very powerful and a very wide variety of things you can do. You can also create websites and blogs. Okay, so there's three basic components of an R Markdown document, which is on the left here. The first component is the metadata. So what you're seeing on the left is what you would be writing in the RStudio console, and when you render that, this is what the document you would get. So this is an HTML format. So this is just to compare the two and how they talk to each other. So the first is the metadata. So everything between the three dashes at the top and bottom is what we'd call the metadata, and it's actually written in a very specific syntax. It's got its own syntax, but won't go too much into that. But you have to be very careful how you write that. But when you often open a template, that is already inserted there. So that just gives the knit-R package guidance on how to render the final document. So the second part is the actual narrative or the text or the prose that you want to write. If you use the hash characters, that indicates section headings. So that's one of the primary things. And then the rest of it follows the Markdown kind of philosophy and how you create formatted text. And then the third component is the interesting stuff is the code. So the code chunks, which can either be rendered by themselves in chunks there or written by themselves, or it can actually be written in line, so within the text. And I'll show you ways to do that. So here we can see we've got, the inbuilt data set in R is the cars data set. And if you just say summary of that, it prints out a summary here. So it's executed the code, integrated it into the HTML, and then printed it here. So that's the very simple workflow for an R Markdown document. So there's lots of benefits to actually doing it through R Markdown. There's other ways you can develop these pages, but it allows you to really do this process very dynamically. So you can check your results as you go along, and you can run bits and pieces by themselves, which helps you make sure everything works as you hope it should. I've said that, interactive analysis. So RStudio, the integrated development environment, is a very super powerful piece of software. There's just so many uses. I would recommend using it for everything. It also allows you to communicate your results and render it across platforms very, very easily. And then importantly, it allows you to create reproducible research that you can share quite easily with your collaborators. So I know in some of the analyses that I've done, I really do run results. A lot of times I realize something's not looking right, so I run it again. And Trevor Branch, who I follow on Twitter, says you do it a lot. So if you don't use Markdown or a kind of reproducible workflow, what you'll do is you'll run your code, then you'll export the PDF, and then you might copy that, turn it into a JPEG, paste it into the Word document, and then pasting small text or numbers where you copy and then tables is a nightmare, right? So you can spend time doing that, or you can just add the new piece of code or new data and rerun it, and it will create the absolutely new, exact same document with the updated results. So that's the big benefit. So just the basic workflow. The first two packages you'll just need to install is the R Markdown package. I'm pretty sure as a dependency it will install the knitr package, but I just put it there anyway. But those are the two primary ones to get started. So once you've installed those in RStudio, everything will be there and available. So the first thing you do is just open a file that has this RMD extension, and it comes with RStudio comes with templates. Then you just write your content in this Markdown syntax. You embed any code that you want, and then you just render it. So I've kind of talked through these steps. That literally is a very simple workflow for getting started. Okay, so I'm going to just go to like a live demonstration of a document that I've prepared, just to show you what the Markdown language, how it renders, and some of the like tips and tricks you can use when creating your own documents. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, actually, I think what I'm going to start with before this. Okay, so if you have, okay, this doesn't look great. It's the VGA hasn't rendered like that well, but anyway, if you can see it, hopefully it'll look better when I make things bigger. So if you've just got, you just open RStudio and you want to start with your first Markdown document, you can literally go to your new file over here. Okay. Anyway, if you go to the option here to create a new document, you'll see an option that says R Markdown. So you just have to click that, and you've got a little window open here that gives you a number of options. So the default thing is to create an HTML Markdown document. So if I just said OK, so I just maybe call the title a test, and I just click OK, it gives me a template that's ready to go. They always include, that like summary of the cars, and they put a data set in there, just so that you can see exactly how it works. So now that I've got something there, the next thing I want to do is render what is in that document into my HTML file. And to do that, I just click the knit button here. So that knits, remember that evaluates and executes the code, and then knits it back into the document. So literally just press knit. If it's a new document, it's always going to ask you to save the file first. So every time you knit the document, it saves it automatically. So you have to give it a name. So I have test 2 maybe. So it knits and it does its thing, and then just provides you with this HTML document. So immediately within seconds, you can create your first Markdown document, and it's just very useful to give you an idea of the defaults you can use. So what's super useful is now that you've got your little first Markdown, and you think, okay, well, HTML is not that useful, perhaps I want to have it in Word. You can go back to the knit button here. It doesn't look like much, but there's an option to say knit to Word. So you literally can do the same thing, and it'll run again. And it does take a bit of time, but then automatically it's opened a Word document, right? With all of that text, the tables are formatted nicely, so everything looks pretty good. And again, you can do that to PDFs. So there's pros and cons, but I think the option to knit to Word is actually quite recent, which is, I think, quite useful to share drafts of your papers with co-authors and stuff. It's quite nice. PDF is a preferred option in terms of formatting. It looks a lot better. So I've knitted, and then you have a PDF. Sorry, it's not rendering on the screen very nicely, but there's a perfect PDF that's rendered there. Okay, so that is just an example to show you how to get going. But what I've done is on the left, I've got my Markdown code that I've written in R, and on the right, I've got the HTML to show you exactly how it's rendered. So the first thing I said is the metadata here. This will be, yeah, I've used a specific Markdown format template. So I didn't actually fill in any of this myself except for the title. And I'll talk a bit more about the template there. But this gives you the option to add table of contents, to customize some of the size of the figures, and allows you to customize a bit of the feel. Okay, so I'm just going to work through and scroll up to the top. So where you see this at the top here, I'm going to try kind of put this code at the top so you can see how that works. So essentially here we've got each line that starts with the hash symbol is a section heading, right? So you can see all the section headings that follow, saying the basics header 2. Now, the first thing you know is how to make bold text. So that's 2 asterisks. Italic text is a single asterisk. And then you can italics and bold at the same time by using 3. There's just some simple text formatting here, how to do an uppercase, is it uppercase? What is it called? Superscript, that's it. Superscript, I don't know how to do subscript, to be honest. I've never had to do it, but you could do it in a formula. But superscript there, if you want to do strike through, you can do that there. So it's the tilde symbols, so 2 of those. Yeah. So the next thing that's important to know when you're writing text here is that at the end of a line, you have to insert 2 spaces to start a new paragraph. So that's what I've done here, and I've got now a new paragraph. Under basic header 3, over here you can see in the R Markdown document, it looks like everything is on, the text is on a separate line, but it's actually still formatted and rendered as a single line. That's because I haven't left any spaces. So you have to actually leave 2 spaces after each line if you want a new paragraph. Okay, so if you want to insert a horizontal rule, you can just use these 3 asterisks. So that's a nice way to break up text. So you might also want to use code highlighting. So often, again, it's not rendering very well on the screen, but often you want to highlight in the text what is R code to separate it from your narrative from what you've actually used as code. So if you use these if you enclose anything in these backtick symbols, it will render in this what looks like code. When you read like on Stack Overflow or any of the help files, it comes up as code. So that's to designate actual R code that you've written, but it allows you to do it inline. If you want to execute inline code, so over here I've got, I said the sum of 2 and 2 is 4. So over here I've written the sum of 2 and 2 is, then I've got backtick R, and then 2 plus 2. So if you want to do inline executable code, then you have to enclose it with 1 backtick, the R, and then whatever code you want to write, and then close it with a backtick. Before you insert code in chunks or inline, you always have to put R. So the R actually, what it's saying is use the R language, and you can use Python and other languages. So that's why it always starts with R. But if you can use multiple languages within the same file, which is also quite useful. And here's an example where I've used the backtick to get us the date. So I just put system date as the execution, and it's written out the date there. And to note, you can make all of those bold or italic, so you can put formatting around the executable, like inline code. So one thing that's also might be useful is using hyperlinks within your document. So a hyperlink essentially you use with square brackets, then you put backticks, and you put the name of your hyperlink, and then you can put the actual URL afterwards. And that renders into this piece of text over here, right? So that's an easy way to generate hyperlinks within your documents. It's also really easy to do that. It's also easy to insert images, which is obviously one of the main things if you're doing R analysis and you've got results that you want to present. If you have save the images as JPEGs or some other kind of file, you can use this code to insert them. So it's this exclamation point with the square brackets, and then followed by whatever your caption is, and then the actual path to your figure. So this figure, the Markdown hex, is stored in my data folder. And what's important to note is that you don't, normally when you read in a file, you would quote it, right? So it'd be a string. For some reason, that's not what you do with Markdown. You actually just write it out. So there's no quotation around the file directory. Okay, so those are really just some of the basics of the actual code formatting. But the next thing I want to just mention is setting up some defaults. So when you evaluate the code within the Markdown, you might want to do a couple of things. You might want to show the code as well as the results. You might want to only show the results. You might only want to show the code. So you need to tell R exactly what kind of behavior you want to do for that. So you can spend some time just looking at the defaults, but here it sets up the defaults for the rest of the document. So using this opt chunk function from the knit-r package, you can say, okay, do I want to evaluate the code and include the results? Do I want to display the code with the results? Do I want to display any warnings or messages or errors? So often you can suppress those so they don't actually show up in the rendered document, which is useful. So that you can look at in time there. So this is just an example that I've got a data set of bird counts. So this is just to show that the first thing I've done here is that I've loaded the tidyverse library, but I've set it to echo is false, messages to is false, and warning is false. So suppress everything. So when I run the actual code, it does nothing. Nothing shows up in the HTML thing, but I need to do it because as the session is running to do any of the other functions, I need to have the package loaded. So even though it's not showing anything, you need to still run that. Okay, so in the next code chunk, I've just read in the data set. And because of the defaults, it's echoed the code that I've written there. So it just shows you there. And it showed some of the information about my variables as it's been read in. Okay, so in this code chunk, all I've written is preview the tibble. So just actually executed the object. And then it's given me a view of the data frame. I can create nicer, neater tables by using this cable function. So cable is a function from the knit-r package, so it just produces more like user-friendly tables when you want to print data frames. You're also able to do just like more like data wrangling stuff and showing. So I've done some wrangling and changed the order of columns. And I've just checked the names there, so that just shows you how you can do something like in that respect. Yeah, I don't know why I put so many data wrangling examples, but nevertheless. So here I've got an example where I've echoed the code so that this table, when I've printed my summary table, you're able to see exactly how I got to that table. So it's often important, you want to show your collaborators or show people in supplementary material of your scientific papers how you got to where you got and the exact code that you used. So here you're able to put the code above it and then render the results immediately below. So I mentioned before that we've got figures and plots that you can put in. You can either save the figures externally and read them in, or you can render the figures within your code. So this is an example where I've created the species richness plot, but I put in the echo is false here because I don't want to show any of the code. I just want to show the output. So all of that code, all it's done is actually print this plot over here. But as I said, maybe you want to explain to someone how that works. So then you'd say, well, how did we make that plot? And in this situation, I've just said, I've changed the default evaluation to false. So don't actually run the code, just print it. So those are just different ways to show how to do these different things. You can control the plot size with these options here, like figure heights, and that should be figure widths, but there's figure height twice. So you can use figure height and figure width to actually change the size of the plots. I was wondering why that wasn't changing actually worked over there. But it's also a general tip is that it's very this Markdown is very picky about spaces and indents and stuff. So you will run into issues, but just keep in mind that if you look at the help files, it is very sensitive to leaving spaces, especially when you set defaults. Okay, so there are ways to change the appearance of your plots. If you are describing some of your statistical models and you need to put like mathematical notation, and it's quite easy to do that. You can use inline equations by enclosing your text within $signs, and then you can also use these centered equations. So it's written in the kind of LaTeX format. So if you learn to write, it's very easy to write equations. I don't know, has anyone tried to write equations in Word? Like it's a nightmare. It's like the worst thing you could possibly do. So that's also one of the benefits if you've got a paper that's much more like statistical in nature, where you need to describe a lot of models. You would want to write that in Markdown, in the LaTeX syntax. So that's another topic, but it's actually very easy to write these kinds of models. I've just shown you can put in another hyperlink here to common statistics equations, so you can look at this file when you have a chance, just to show you how that's done. So the shortcuts, there are just the three that I use mainly is that the Control-Shift-C is to comment out the code. Every time you want to insert a code chunk, you can just press Alt-Shift-I, that's to insert the chunk, and then to knit the documents is Control-Shift-K. So often you would insert a chunk, put some code in, and you see how's this going to look, and you quickly knit, puts it together, and renders the output. So it'll always show up. It'll just automatically show up, so you can keep running it and see what everything looks like. This remedy package, so this package I would also advise looking into. It's a package that has a bunch of add-ins in RStudio that helps you format your R Markdown code. It helps you with inserting code and doing like all these fancy little tricks and formats. So I would look into it. It's very useful, and it's helpful to get started where you don't have to do things manually. It gives you a lot of help on getting things done. Why did I put this? Oh yeah, footnotes. Footnotes are cool. You can just click here on the little one, and it takes you to the bottom where there's a footnote, and then you can jump back up to one. So the footnotes are just there. Yeah, so that's the basics of what I wanted to present as kind of an applied example. But another cool thing you can do is you can publish this your HTML file and share it like on the web. So there's a website called RPubs where you can actually, for free, you can publish and share your document. So I'll just show you how that's done. It's in RStudio. It's built into RStudio. So the first thing you need to do is just get an RPubs account. But when you've got your document that you maybe want to send to your co-authors, you don't actually want to send them a file. You just want to send them a link. You can click this icon here, which will bring up this window that says create a new RPubs. So I will do that. I will create a new one. It'll take me to the website, and it'll just say, give me a title. Okay. Give me a description, and then give me a URL name. So maybe I could go SEEC talk. So I've already logged in to this, but I just press continue, and then there's the document straight from into RPubs, and then you can literally just copy the URL, paste it, or send it to your collaborator, and it's stored online, and you can share it. So quite easy and quite useful. If you've got anything sensitive, you don't want to do this because everything is available to everyone. There's no private storage on RPubs, but there is RConnect, I think, is a new kind of way to do this where you can, I think, have private storage. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much the basics of what I wanted to show. All of the material, this file, plus all the other like code that I put in it with the data set is on my GitHub page, which I'll put, it'll be on the website, so you can find that. So if you just look here, everything will be, all the materials that you need to do to recreate this will be there. And yeah, just to go through a couple of the resources. This is the last slide, just with some of the resources. That our Markdown book is like the book. It's like Hadley Wickham's data science book. It's the book for Markdown. It's written in Bookdown, so yeah, that's kind of cool. There's the cheat sheets, which are always useful. The RStudio cheat sheets are super useful. There's lots of templates. So if you want to do like slide presentations, there's a whole bunch of ways you can customize and do templates. I've mentioned RPubs. Yeah, RStudio Connect is another way to store your publications. And then I don't know if anyone's looked at the RStudio website, but they've got like stacks of webinars, and they're really, really good. They're from all of their conferences. So there's lots of talks on our Markdown there. It's the remedy package that I mentioned, and then these are the custom themes that I was using in today's presentation. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So we're pretty good for time, but yeah,